The scent of moon blossoms was a lie. It spoke of joy, of sacred bonds and new beginnings. But to Marin's soul it was the cloying fragrance of a tomb, hidden in the deepest shadows of Ashenmoor's great hall. She was a ghost at her own funeral, forced to watch the man who was once her everything pledge his soul to another. The air, thick with the musk of 100 wolves celebrating, felt thin in her lungs. Every whisper was a phantom claw scraping against her skin. Every laugh a stone cast at the cursed Omega who was never and would never be enough. The weight of the moon pressed down through the high-arched windows, bathing the altar in silver light that felt mocking and cruel. It illuminated him. Kael, her fated mate. His shoulders were broad and strong under the ceremonial furs, his profile sharp and proud as he gazed down at his chosen bride. He was everything a beta should be, loyal, powerful, the future anchor of the pack. And he was beautiful, so painfully beautiful that looking at him felt like staring into the sun. Marin's heart, a hollowed-out thing in her chest, gave a useless, aching throb. Her gaze drifted to the woman beside him. Celine, golden-haired with a wolf that ran strong and fast from a lineage of warriors. She was perfect. She was whole. Everything Marin was not. Marin's hands trembled, and she clenched them in the rough fabric of her tunic, a shapeless garment meant to make her disappear. But she could not disappear. Alpha Aldrich had made sure of that. "You will stand witness," he had commanded, his voice laced with the cold authority that had broken her. "You will see what the pack requires. You will understand what you cost us." What she cost them was strength. An Omega born without a voice, and as they discovered on her first shift, without a wolf to call her own. She was a void, a curse. The bond that had flared to life between her and Kael on their 18th birthdays had been deemed a mistake by the fates, a cosmic error that the Alpha, with the Elder's blessing, had ritually severed. They had sliced it from the world, leaving behind a phantom limb that ached with every beat of his heart she could no longer feel. Now she was just Marin Ashwood, the silent Omega, the pack's cautionary tale, a splinter under its collective nail. The Elder's voice droned on, weaving the ancient words of the pledging rite. Each syllable was a hammer blow against Marin's fragile composure. She focused on the cold stone floor beneath her worn boots, on the draft that snaked in from the corridor, anything to ground her. She could feel the stares. The pity from the older females, the undisguised contempt from the pack warriors who saw her as a weakness, Kael had thankfully shed. They believed her silence was a stubborn refusal, an insult. They could not understand that the mechanism for speech had been broken in her since birth, a lock with no key. Her thoughts were a raging, screaming torrent trapped behind a dam of useless flesh. "Do you, Kael of Ashenmoor, take Celine of the Iron Peak line to be your mate, your anchor, and your Luna?" The Elder's voice echoed in the sudden reverent hush. Marin's head snapped up against her will. She saw Kael turn to Celine, his expression softening into a look of adoration that he had once, for a fleeting, wondrous month, aimed only at her. It was a look that promised protection, devotion, a lifetime. "I do." Kael's voice rang out deep and certain. It was the same voice that had once whispered her name in the darkness, telling her it did not matter that she could not speak, that he would be her voice. He had lied. "And do you, Celine of Iron Peak, take Kael of Ashenmoor to be your mate, your strength, and your Alpha's right hand?" Celine's smile was radiant. "I do." A wave of polite, joyous murmurs rippled through the pack. It was done. All that remained was the mark, the final indelible seal that would overwrite the ghost of Marin's claim on his soul forever. The Elder presented a small silver basin. Kael dipped his fingers into the sacred oil within, his gaze fixed on the pale, perfect skin of Celine's neck. He leaned in, his canines lengthening, gleaming white in the moonlight. Marin's breath hitched. A silent scream built in her throat, a pressure so immense she thought her bones would crack. This was it, the final severing, the moment she would truly become nothing. She shut her eyes, a single hot tear finally escaping, tracing a path of fire down her cold cheek. Let it be over. Let the pain end. Boom! The sound was not a sound. It was a physical concussion that shook the very foundations of the hall. The great oak doors, bound with iron, burst inward as if struck by lightning, slamming against the stone walls with a deafening crack. A primal wind, smelling of ozone and ancient pines and blood, tore through the room. It extinguished every candle, plunging the hall into a disorienting chaos of moonlight and deep shadow. Gasps and startled cries erupted, but they were instantly choked off by a presence that flooded the space. It was an aura of absolute suffocating power, a weight so immense it buckled knees and stole the air from every lung. The pack's formidable alpha, Aldrich, instinctively bowed his head, his body trembling in a display of submission so profound it was terrifying. Every wolf in the room, from the strongest warrior to the smallest pup, was flattened by it. A figure stood silhouetted in the ruined doorway, a man so large he seemed to consume the moonlight behind him. He moved with a predator's deliberate grace, his heavy boots echoing on the flagstones with the finality of a death knell. As he stepped into a shaft of moonlight, the pack's collective breath caught. King Theron Blackfrost, the Wolf King of the North. A figure of terrifying legend, a ruler forged in the brutal wars of the fractured territories. Whispers said his wolf was a monster, a throwback to the days of primordials. They said he had clawed his way to the throne over the bodies of his own kin. Scars marred his face, a testament to a life of violence. The most prominent, a silver line that cut across his left eye, rendering it a blind, milky orb. But his right eye burned with molten amber, a sliver of the feral sun. He was 44 years old, not young, not old. A warrior in his prime who had seen too much war. The gray at his temples was not age, but the burden of nearly 30 years fighting monsters, some of them within himself. Silence. Utter, terrified silence. Even the crackling of the central hearth seemed to have died. King Theron's gaze swept over the hall, dismissing the cowering alpha, the stunned elder, the frozen couple at the altar, as if they were nothing more than furniture. His stare was a physical thing, a hunter's survey of his domain. And then it stopped. It stopped on her. Meryn froze, trapped in the suffocating intensity of his gaze. He was not looking at her. He was looking through her, stripping away the shadows, the shame, the silence, and seeing the raw, terrified thing huddled inside. It felt like being struck by lightning. The air crackled around her. He knew. Somehow this impossible, terrifying king knew she was there. He began to walk down the aisle. The pack parted before him, a wave receding from a jagged cliff. Not a single wolf dared to meet his eye, but his gaze never left Meryn. With every step he took, a strange, forgotten hum started deep in her bones, a resonance she had not felt since her bond with Chael had been destroyed. It was faint, a bare whisper, but it was there. He stopped a dozen paces from the altar, perfectly between her and the bride and groom. He did not turn to address the alpha or the elder. He kept his burning eye fixed on Meryn, hidden in the dark. Then he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it was a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through the stone floor, a sound of gravel and menace and absolute authority. Her. The single word hung in the dead air, sharp and lethal as an obsidian blade. Before anyone could process the meaning, his hand moved, faster than thought. He grabbed Meryn's wrist. The contact sent a jolt like lightning shooting up her arm, a searing, white-hot agony that erupted on the back of her neck. She cried out, a choked, voiceless gasp, her hands flying to the spot where a mate's mark should have been. It felt as if a star had just been born beneath her skin, branding her from the inside out. Her pain was not her own. A collective scream tore through the hall. Every mated wolf clutched at their own mark, crying out as the king's proclamation, backed by the sheer power of his will, sent a shockwave through every bond in the room. Selene crumpled at the altar, shrieking. Chael staggered back, his hand at his own neck, his face a mask of confusion and agony. Fate had not just rewritten its choice. It had set their entire world on fire. And Meryn was standing at the very heart of the inferno. The king's grip on her wrist was iron. Not bruising, but absolute. He pulled, not roughly, but with the certainty of a man who expected to be obeyed. Walk or be carried. He did not speak the words aloud, but she heard them in the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. Meryn walked, not from submission, but from pride. She would not be dragged from this place like a sack of grain. She took one step, then another, moving away from the wall she had hidden behind for so long. Every eye in the hall followed her. She heard Selene's sharp, indrawn breath, but she did not falter. Behind her, Alpha Aldrich finally found his voice. "Your Majesty, you cannot take her. She is ours. She is cursed." King Theron did not even pause. His response was a low rumble, delivered over his shoulder without turning. "She is yours no longer." And then they were through the shattered doors, out into the cold night air. Outside, a monstrous black warhorse stood waiting, its eyes gleaming in the dark, its breath pluming in the chill. Several dark-clad guards, silent as wraiths, materialized from the trees, their own mounts in tow. The king lifted her as if she weighed nothing, setting her on the front of the massive saddle. The position wedged her intimately against the pommel, her body fitting into the space clearly meant for this purpose. Before she could process the implication, he swung up behind her, his arms caging her in, his chest a wall of solid muscle at her back. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against her spine. It was a rhythm of absolute calm, absolute control. He did not look down at her. He simply spurred the great beast forward, and they plunged into the deep, unforgiving darkness of the northern forest, leaving Ashenmoor and the ashes of Merrin's life behind. The journey north was a descent into a colder, harder world. For 7 days they rode, the landscape shifting from soft earth and lush woods to jagged rock and sentinel pines that clawed at a bruised twilight sky. Merrin rode in a state of suspended shock. She was cocooned in the king's enormous cloak, her body wedged between the high pommel of the saddle and the unyielding wall of his chest. The rhythmic sway of the warhorse was a monotonous lullaby of flight, each hoofbeat carrying her further from the only life she had known into an abyss of terrifying uncertainty. Her world had shrunk to a collection of raw sensations, the biting wind that found the gaps in her borrowed warmth, the constant solid pressure of Theron's body at her back, a source of both primal fear and an unsettling security. The scent of him was overwhelming, pine, cold iron, and the musky, dominant scent of his wolf, a fragrance so potent it seemed to seep directly into her bloodstream. It was nothing like Kyle scent of riverstone and summer grass. This was the scent of winter itself, of dominance and survival. And beneath it all, the hum. The strange, throbbing energy at the base of her skull pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a secret rhythm only she could feel. It was a tether, a brand, an anchor pulling her toward this formidable stranger. His guards rode like ghosts, their movements economical and silent, their faces hidden by the shadows of their cowls. They never spoke, communicating with subtle shifts in weight and barely perceptible hand signals. They were wolves, she knew, but they moved with the discipline of men who had seen too much war. They were his pack, a pack of shadows and steel. On the second day, Merrin began to notice the 4 who rode closest to the king. They formed a protective diamond around him, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line, their hands never far from weapons. The largest was a mountain of a man with a face like weathered granite. Scars crisscrossed his cheek and neck, old wounds that had healed into silvered ridges. His eyes, when they flicked toward Merrin, were hard and assessing. There was no warmth there, only the cold calculation of a veteran who had seen too many battles to trust easily. Wulfric. She heard the king address him once, a single clipped word. The second was leaner, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He studied the maps during their brief stops, tracing routes with a scarred finger, conferring with the king in low murmurs. A strategist, a man who saw the world as a chessboard. Torsten. The third was younger than the others, perhaps in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and a face that might have been kind once, before war had carved the softness away. He tried to catch her eye during a rest, offering a water skin with a tentative smile. Wulfric's sharp word cut him off, and the smile died. Roan. The fourth was the youngest, close to Merrin's own age. His eyes held something the others had lost. Hope, perhaps, or the stubborn belief that the world could still be good. He watched her with open curiosity, not suspicion. Chaol, the 4, the king's inner guard, men who had fought beside him for years, who would die for him without question. And now they were watching her, this southern Omega who had been claimed by their king for reasons they did not understand. She overheard them talking on the 3rd night, when they thought she was asleep. Their voices low, meant to be private. "Southern softness will get him killed," Wulfric growled. "We fought too hard to lose him to sentiment." "She is not sentiment," Torsten replied, his tone thoughtful. He claimed her in front of 100 witnesses, risked a bond rupture for the entire hall. That is not impulse, that is necessity. What necessity requires a mute omega? Wulfric spat. We will see, Torsten said. We will watch. Maren lay still, her heart pounding. She was not wanted here. She was a liability, a weakness these hard men did not have patience for. And perhaps they were right. What could she possibly offer a king? On the 5th day, the passes narrowed. Snow began to dust the ground, clinging to dark branches. The air grew thin and sharp. And then, as the sun was setting in a blaze of cold fire, they crested a ridge, and she saw it. Blackfrost Hold. It was not a castle. It was a fortress, a titan of black granite that seemed to grow organically from the mountain's peak, its towers piercing the clouds like jagged shards of obsidian. No banners flew from its ramparts. No concessions were made to beauty. It was a place of pure, unadorned strength, a place that perfectly mirrored the king who ruled from it. Awe and terror warred within her. This was her new home, her cage. The great iron gates groaned open for them, and they rode into a vast wind-scored courtyard. Stable hands emerged from the shadows to take the horses. Their heads bowed low, their movements swift and silent. No one dared meet the king's eye. He dismounted and once again lifted her down, his hand lingering at the small of her back as he guided her toward the main entrance. Inside, the keep was even more imposing than the outside. The great hall was a cavern of shadow and stone, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness far above. Torches set in iron sconces cast flickering, dancing light on walls of bare black rock. The air was cold, smelling of wood smoke and old stone. A few servants moved through the gloom like specters, their footsteps echoing in the crushing silence. There were no moon blossoms here, no laughter, no warmth. This was a place stripped of all softness. An old woman appeared, her face a weathered map of deep lines and iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, sharp and pale, took in Maren with a single sweeping glance, not judgmental, simply assessing. "Bryn," the king said, "see to her." The woman nodded once, not a bow, but a nod of equals. She took Maren's arm, her grip firm, and led her away without a word. The king watched them go, his expression unreadable. Maren was led through a maze of corridors to a small stone chamber. A fire burned in the hearth, casting warm light on rough-hewn walls. A simple bed with clean linens, a basin of water still steaming. Bryn worked in silence, helping her out of the travel-stained clothes, guiding her into the bath. Her hands were efficient, impersonal, the touch of someone who had performed this task 1,000 times, but not unkind. When Maren was clean and dressed in a simple wool tunic the color of storm clouds, Bryn finally spoke. "You are not the first anchor he has sought." Maren's eyes widened. The old woman continued, her voice matter-of-fact. "3 others before you. Good women, strong. The claiming killed them. The bond was too violent. Their bodies could not withstand the force of it. They died screaming as the mark burned through them. Bryn folded the soiled clothes with precise movements. But you survived. The claiming did not destroy you. That means your bond is different, meant to last, at least for a time." She gathered the bundle and moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "How long that time is depends on how well you anchor, and how much you are willing to sacrifice." The door closed with a soft thud, leaving Maren alone with the terrible knowledge that 3 women had died in agony, trying to be what she now was, and she had no idea why she had survived when they had not. The next morning, Bryn returned with food: oat cakes, dried meat, strong bitter tea. She set the tray down and gestured for Maren to follow. They walked through corridors of cold stone until they reached a set of heavy oak doors. Bryn pushed them open to reveal a vast library. Dust motes danced in shafts of gray light that filtered through narrow windows. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with ancient tomes and brittle scrolls. "You cannot speak," Bryn said, "but you can read. Learn what you must." She left Maren alone among the books. Maren ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles: Histories of the North, Chronicles of the Blackfrost Line, Tactical Manuals. And then, on a high shelf, a thin volume bound in cracked leather. The title was faded, but she could make it out. The Curse of the First Wolves. She pulled it down carefully. The pages were yellowed, the ink brown with age. She began to read. The Blackfrost kings were not merely rulers. They were descendants of the first wolves, ancient primal creatures of immense power and uncontrollable rage. The blood carried a gift and a curse, strength beyond measure, but fury that could consume the mind, madness that turned kings into monsters. The text spoke of king after king who had succumbed, who had slaughtered their own families, their own councils, their own people, who had to be put down like rabid dogs by the very armies sworn to protect them. There was a list. Names and dates. King Aldrin Blackfrost died in the 44th year of his reign, slain by his own guard. Casualty count, 42. Aldrin, Theron's father. Meryn did the arithmetic in her head. If Aldrin ruled for 44 years and died nearly 30 years ago, he had taken the throne young, very young. The fury ran in the bloodline, generation after generation, an unbreakable curse. She kept reading. The old texts spoke of anchors, of soul bonds so strong they could temper the fury, quiet the storm. But every account ended the same way. The anchor died, consumed by the effort of holding back the madness, burned out like a candle flame in a gale. 3 years was the longest any had lasted, and that did not count the ones who died in the claiming itself. The bond between a Blackfrost king and an anchor was so violent, so overwhelming, that most could not survive the initial mark. Their bodies simply could not withstand the power. Meryn closed the book slowly. She understood now. She was not here to be a queen. She was here to be a sacrifice, a living shield between the king and his own demon. And when she burned out, as all the others had, he would simply find another, or he would fall. She spent the rest of the day in the library, reading everything she could find. She learned of tactics and strategies, of the brutal politics of the North. She learned the names of the lords, the histories of their houses. She armed herself with knowledge because it was the only weapon she had. When Bryn came to fetch her for the evening meal, Meryn followed in silence. They did not go to a great hall. They went to a small chamber off the kitchens, where a simple table was set for one. "The king does not dine with the court," Bryn said. "He has not for many years." Meryn ate alone, the food tasteless in her mouth. The next day, she was summoned. Bryn led her to a chamber deep in the keep. The door was guarded by 2 silent warriors who stepped aside at their approach. Inside, a long table dominated the room. Maps were spread across its surface, carved wooden markers representing troops and territories. A dozen men stood around it, their faces hard, their eyes calculating. Northern lords, Meryn realized. This was a war council. At the head of the table stood King Theron. He did not look up as she entered. He was listening to a heavy-set man with a florid face who was gesturing angrily at the map. "Lord Hadrian demands grain redistribution," the man was saying. "He claims the eastern holdings are hoarding while his people starve." "Hadrian is a fool who cannot manage his own stores," another lord shot back. "Why should we pay for his incompetence?" The argument escalated, voices rising. Theron remained silent, his jaw tight, his good eye fixed on the map. But Meryn could feel it. The pressure building, the hum at the base of her skull intensifying, turning sharp, painful. The fury was rising. She had read about it. The old text described it as a black tide, a wave of pure rage that obliterated reason. Once it crested, there was no stopping it. Only blood could satisfy it. The lords did not see the danger. They kept arguing, their voices growing louder, more heated, accusations flying, insults traded. "Enough!" Theron's voice was a low growl. The room fell silent, but the pressure did not ease. It grew. The air thickened. The scent of old blood and iron, phantom echoes from his scars, began to fill the chamber. His hands were clenched into fists on the table. His breathing had gone harsh, ragged. The canines were starting to lengthen. The lords took a step back. They had seen this before. They knew what came next. Meryn moved without thinking. Terror screamed at her to run, to hide, to protect herself. But something deeper, something tied to the humming bond at her neck, pulled her forward. She walked to the table. She placed her hand on his. The effect was instantaneous. The black tide that had been building, ready to crash down and consume everything in its path, shattered. Like a wave hitting stone, it simply broke apart and dissolved. Theron sucked in a harsh breath, his head snapping up. He stared down at her hand covering his, then up at her face, his amber eye wide with shock. The fury was gone. The room was silent, except for Meryn's own ragged breathing and the blood she could taste in the back of her throat. Pain lanced through her skull, sharp and vicious. Her vision swam. She felt warmth on her upper lip and touched it. Her fingers came away red. Nosebleed. Her legs gave out. She crumpled. Theron caught her before she hit the floor, his arms coming around her, lowering her carefully. His face was close to hers now, and she could see the horror in his eye. "What did you do?" he whispered. She could not answer. The world was spinning, darkness creeping in at the edges. The last thing she heard before unconsciousness took her was his voice, rough with something she could not name. "Get the healer, now!" When Maren woke, she was in a bed. Not the small chamber she had been given, but a larger room with a fire roaring in the hearth. The walls were bare stone, but there were furs piled on the bed, soft and warm. Her head felt like it had been split open. Every breath was an effort, but she was alive. She turned her head carefully. A figure sat in a chair beside the bed. Not the king. An older man, his gray hair tied back, his face lined and weathered. He wore the simple tunic of a warrior, but there was something else about him. Authority, command. "You are awake. Good." His voice was rough, like stone grinding on stone. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and assessing. One hand rested on his chest, and Maren could see the careful way he breathed, as if something inside pained him. "I am Commander Brant. I have served the Black Frost Kings for 40 years. I have seen many things, but I have never seen a fury quelled so completely." He paused, his gaze searching her face. "How much do you know about what you are?" Maren could only stare. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her head and she fell back with a gasp. "Easy," Brant said. "The anchoring took its toll. You will recover. This time." This time. The words hung heavy. He reached into his tunic and pulled out something small. Silver glinted in the firelight. A dagger. The blade was etched with runes, old magic. The hilt was worn smooth by years of handling. He set it on the table beside her bed. "This was given to me nearly 30 years ago," he said. His voice was quiet now, sad, when King Aldrin began to turn. "When we knew the fury would eventually consume him, it was my duty, as commander of his guard, to end him when that day came." Brant's hand touched his chest again, and Maren understood. The wound, the one that was killing him slowly. "I failed," he said simply. "I hesitated. An old man's weakness. By the time I acted, 42 people were dead, including the Queen, Aldrin's own wife, Theron's mother." Maren's breath caught. Theron was 16 years old. He watched me put a silver blade through his father's heart, and then he took the crown and the curse that came with it. He has spent every day since fighting not to become Aldrin, fighting the fury alone. Brant leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "Until you." He gestured to the dagger. "The old texts speak of anchors, soul bonds strong enough to temper the fury, but they also speak of the cost. Every anchoring damages you, burns you from the inside. 3 years is the longest any anchor has lasted." He let that sink in. "You are not here to be his queen, girl. You are here to be his leash, and when the leash can no longer hold, you are here to be his end." Maren stared at the silver dagger. She understood now. The claiming, the bond, the way Theron had looked at her in the council chamber, horror and hope warring in his eye. He did not want her to love him. He wanted her to kill him if he turned. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Brant asked. Maren nodded slowly. Her hand, trembling, reached out and closed around the dagger's hilt. The metal was cold against her palm. "Good," Brant said. He stood, his movements careful, pained. "Keep it close. And do not make my mistake. Do not hesitate when the time comes." He left her alone with the blade and the terrible knowledge of what she truly was. 2 days later, Maren was strong enough to walk. Bryn brought her to a different chamber, larger and more austere. The king's own rooms. Theron stood by the window, looking out over the snow-dusted mountains. He did not turn when she entered. "You have spoken with Brant." It was not a question. Maren stood silent, waiting. He finally turned. The firelight caught the scars on his face, the blind eye a pale moon. His good eye was shadowed, unreadable. "What I need from you is not kindness, not companionship, not love." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping directly in front of her. Close enough that she had to crane her neck back to see his face. Close enough that she could smell pine and cold steel and something wild beneath. "I need a leash," he said quietly. "And when the leash breaks, I need an executioner." He held out his hand, not in greeting, in offering. "The compact is simple. You anchor me when the fury rises. You keep me human as long as you can. And when you can no longer hold, you end it. You put silver through my heart, and you save this kingdom from another mad king." Marin looked at his hand, scarred, calloused, the hand of a warrior, the hand that would one day force her to kill him. "In return," he continued, "you will have safety, shelter, everything you need. You will be protected, valued. No one will call you cursed here. No one will cast you aside." He paused. "But it will kill you, the anchoring. A year, maybe 2, maybe 3 if you are strong, but it will burn you out. You understand this?" Marin nodded. She understood. This was not a rescue. This was a transaction, a soldier's bargain. Her life in exchange for his control, her death in exchange for a kingdom's safety. "Do you accept?" She looked into his amber eye. She saw no warmth there, no affection, only grim necessity. He was a man at war with himself, and he was offering her a place on the battlefield. She thought of Ashenmore, of being nothing, of watching Kyle pledge himself to another while she stood in the shadows, of a life without purpose, without meaning, slowly fading until she simply disappeared. Here she would matter. Here she would have a reason to exist, even if that reason was her own death. Slowly, deliberately, Marin placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm, solid, absolute. He led her to the table where weapons lay spread. He picked up the silver dagger Brant had given her and pressed it into her free hand. "Keep this close," he said. "Learn to use it. Practice on me if you must. But be ready." He released her hand and stepped back. "Welcome to Blackfrost Hold, Marin Ashwood. You are my anchor now, and when the time comes, you will be my end." The compact was sealed, not with a kiss, not with vows of love, but with the cold weight of silver in her palm and the certain knowledge that she had just agreed to her own execution. In a year, maybe 2, maybe 3, she would burn out trying to hold back a monster, and then she would put a blade through his heart. It was not a happily ever after. It was a death sentence with purpose. And somehow, standing in the cold stone chamber with a king who needed her silence more than her voice, it felt like the first real choice she had ever made. Outside, the northern wind howled. Snow began to fall, covering the black granite fortress in white. Winter was coming, and Marin Ashwood, the cursed Omega of Ashenmore, had just become the anchor of the north. The only question was how long she could hold before the weight dragged her under. The days that followed fell into a rhythm as harsh and unforgiving as the northern winter itself. Marin woke each morning to the sound of steel on steel, the clash of training blades in the courtyard below. The warriors of Blackfrost Hold did not sleep late. They rose before dawn and fought until their muscles screamed, because in the north, weakness was death. Bryn brought food at first light, oat cakes and dried meat, the same simple fare the soldiers ate. No delicacies, no southern comforts. This was a garrison, not a palace, and Marin was expected to adapt or perish. She adapted. She watched the warriors train from her window. Wulfric moved like a mountain given motion, his strikes heavy and brutal. Torsten fought with calculated precision, every movement economical, wasting no energy. Roan was all power and momentum, a battering ram in human form. And Kale, the youngest, fought with a grace that spoke of natural talent not yet hardened by decades of war. The 4, always together, always watching. And always, she felt Theron. The bond at the base of her skull was a constant presence now, a thread connecting her to him no matter where he was in the keep. When he was in the war room, she felt the weight of decisions pressing down like iron. When he walked the battlements, she felt the bite of wind and the watchfulness of a king surveying his domain. When he slept, which was rarely and poorly, she felt the restless turning, the nightmares that clawed at him in the dark. It was invasive and intimate in a way that had nothing to do with affection. She was tethered to a stranger's soul, feeling every fluctuation of his mood, every spike of anger, every shadow of old grief. And beneath it all, always the fury, a low, constant pressure like storm clouds on the horizon, waiting, building, inevitable. On the 4th day, Bryn led her to a training yard. Not the main courtyard where the warriors practiced, but a smaller space tucked behind the armory. A crude wooden post stood at its center, wrapped in straw and leather. The old woman handed her a knife, not the silver dagger. A common blade, well balanced, the edge honed to razor sharpness. "You will learn," Bryn said, "not to kill warriors, but to survive long enough to reach the silver." For 2 hours each morning, Bryn taught her how to hold the blade, how to strike, where the vulnerable points were on a human body. throat, inner thigh, under the ribs angled up toward the heart. Marin's hands blistered and bled. She had never held a weapon before. In Ashenmoor, Omegas were not taught to fight. They were taught to submit, to serve, to disappear. Here she was being taught to kill. Again, Bryn commanded, and Marin struck the post. Again, until her arm shook and her vision blurred. Again. She did not ask why. She knew why. In a year, maybe 2, she would need to drive silver through a king's heart. She needed hands that would not tremble when that moment came. On the 6th day, she was summoned to the Great Hall, not for a private audience, but for court. The northern lords had gathered, a dozen hard-faced men who ruled their territories with the same brutal efficiency they used to survive the winter. Marin stood behind Theron's chair, not beside it. Not yet. She was a shadow, a curiosity, a thing these men did not understand and therefore did not trust. They spoke of grain stores and border disputes, of bandits in the mountain passes, and the price of iron. Theron listened more than he spoke, his amber eye sharp, missing nothing. When he did speak, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. There was no debate, no argument, only obedience. But Marin felt the pressure building, the fury responding to the endless stream of problems, of challenges to his rule, of threats to his kingdom. It coiled in her skull like a serpent preparing to strike. She placed her hand on the back of his chair, not touching him, just close, a reminder that she was there. The pressure eased, fractionally, temporarily, but it eased. Lord Hadrian, a florid-faced man with cold, calculating eyes, noticed. His gaze flicked from her hand to Theron's profile, and something shifted in his expression. Not respect, calculation. After the court dispersed, Theron stood. He did not look at her, but he spoke. "Walk with me." It was not a request. They walked the battlements in silence. The wind was a living thing up here, clawing at their cloaks, biting exposed skin. Below, the fortress sprawled like a sleeping beast of black stone. Beyond, the mountains stretched away into infinity, white peaks stabbing at a gray sky. "You feel it," Theron said. "Not a question." Marin nodded. "Every hour of every day, the fury, the weight, you feel what I carry." Another nod. He stopped, gripping the stone parapet with both hands. His knuckles went white. "It will get worse. When the campaign begins, when blood is spilled, battle triggers it like nothing else. The scent of it, the taste. My wolf remembers when we were apex predators, when killing was survival. It wants to return to that." He turned to face her. The blind eye was a moon of dead white. The good eye burned. "I am telling you this because you need to know what you agreed to. In court, the fury is manageable. Irritation, anger. I can control that. But in battle, it is a beast. And if I lose control on a battlefield, I will not stop at the enemy. I will kill my own men. I will kill you." Marin held his gaze. She understood. He was not trying to frighten her. He was giving her tactical information, preparing her for the worst. "Brant taught you to fight," he continued. "Good. But you need to know when to fight and when to run. If my eyes go black, if the wolf takes over completely, you run. You get behind the 4 and you let them handle it." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face but not touching. "You are my anchor, but you are also mortal, fragile. I could break you without meaning to. Remember that." His hand dropped. He turned back to the mountains. "Garrett will not yield. The reports say he is fortifying his position. This will come to siege, to battle. And you will be there because I cannot risk the fury without you close. Do you understand what I am asking of you?" Marin stepped forward. She pulled a small piece of charcoal from her pocket, something she had started carrying to communicate. On the stone parapet, she wrote, "I understand. I am ready." Theron looked at the words. Something flickered in his expression. Not warmth, but perhaps the faintest shadow of respect. "We leave in 3 days. Prepare yourself." That night, Marin could not sleep. The bond hummed with Theron's own restlessness. She felt him pacing in his chambers, felt the weight of command pressing down, felt the fury prowling like a caged wolf. She rose from her bed and wrapped a cloak around herself. The keep was silent, the corridors lit by the occasional guttering torch. She walked without destination, simply needing to move. She found herself in the library. The fire had burned down to embers, but enough light remained to see by. She pulled down the book on Blackfrost history again, reading the accounts of mad kings. King Roderick Blackfrost slaughtered his entire council during a winter feast. Casualty count, 18. King Matthias Blackfrost killed his 3 sons in a hunting accident that was no accident, died by his own hand 3 days later. King Aldrin Blackfrost, the worst of them all, 42 dead, including his queen. Every generation the Fury claimed another king, and every generation the kingdom bled. A sound behind her made her turn. Wulfric stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking the exit. He did not speak for a long moment, just studied her with those hard, assessing eyes. "You read about them," he said finally. "The Mad Kings." Meryn nodded. He walked to the fire, stirring the embers back to life, adding wood with practiced efficiency. "I was there," he said, when Aldrin turned. "I was 24 years old, a newly promoted warrior, eager to prove myself." He sat heavily in a chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "We knew it was coming. The signs were all there, the sudden rages, the paranoia, the way his eyes would go distant, like he was listening to voices only he could hear. Brant tried to get the Queen to leave, to take young Theron and flee south. She refused. She thought love could save him." Wulfric's scarred hands clenched into fists. It happened at midwinter, a feast to celebrate the longest night. Aldrin was drinking heavily, which made it worse. Someone made a joke. I do not even remember what it was, something harmless. But Aldrin heard treason in it. His voice went flat, emotionless, the tone of a man reciting a nightmare he had lived through too many times. He killed the jokester first, tore out his throat with bare hands. Then he turned on the others, servants, lords, anyone within reach. His own queen tried to stop him, tried to reach the man she loved. He gutted her like a deer. Meryn felt ice in her veins. Theron was 16. He watched his father murder his mother, watched the king he was supposed to serve become a monster. And when Brant finally struck the killing blow, when Aldrin fell with silver in his heart, Theron did not cry. He did not rage. He simply picked up the crown from his father's corpse and put it on his own head. Wulfric looked at her directly. "For nearly 30 years I have served him. Nearly 30 years watching him fight not to become Aldrin. Every day is a battle, every decision, every anger, every moment of stress. He fights alone, until you." He leaned forward. "In that council chamber, I saw him losing. I saw the black tide rising. We were reaching for our blades, preparing to do what we did to Aldrin, and then you touched him, and the fury just stopped." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Do you know what that means to us? To the Four? To men who have spent nearly 3 decades waiting for the day we would have to kill the king we serve?" Meryn could only stare. "It means hope. For the first time in nearly 30 years, we have hope that maybe this time will be different. That maybe you can hold where the others failed." He stood, his chair scraping against stone. "So when you burn out and die in a year or two, know this. You will die having given us something we thought we had lost forever. And for that, Southern Omega or not, you will have our loyalty." He left her alone with the dying fire and the weight of those words. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Meryn trained with Bryn. She studied maps in the library. She stood silent during war councils, feeling the fury ebb and flow through the bond. And each night she felt Theron's restlessness, the anticipation of coming battle, the fear, deeply buried but present, that this time the fury would win. On the 3rd night, the night before they were to depart, the attack came. Meryn woke to a hand clamped over her mouth. She tried to scream, but no sound came. It never did. Her curse ensured her death would be as silent as her life. A face loomed over her in the darkness. Young, barely more than a boy, perhaps 19. His eyes were wide with terror, his hands shaking. He held a knife to her throat, but the blade trembled so badly it was almost useless. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Lord Garrett sent me. He says the Omega makes the beast stronger. He says without you, the king will fall and the North will be free of Blackfrost tyranny." The boy was crying. Tears streaked his face, catching the moonlight from the window. "I do not want to do this, but my family is in Garrett's territory. If I fail, he will kill them. I have to. Meryn's training with Bryn kicked in. The knife at her throat was in his right hand. His weight was poorly distributed, leaning too far forward. She could see the exact sequence of movements required. She drove her knee up hard into his groin. The boy gasped, his weight shifting. She rolled, throwing him off balance, and grabbed for the common blade under her pillow. Her hand closed around the hilt. They grappled in the darkness, crashing into furniture. The boy was stronger but terrified and untrained. Meryn was desperate and had been taught by a woman who had survived 40 years in Blackfrost Hold. She got the blade between them and pushed. The boy stumbled back, clutching his arm where she had cut him. Not deep, not fatal, but enough to hurt. He stared at her in shock. "You are supposed to be weak, helpless." Maren raised the blade, her stance exactly as Bryn had taught her. She was shaking, her heart hammering, but the knife was steady. The door exploded inward. Theron stood framed in the doorway, and he was no longer a man. His eyes were black pits. His canines had elongated into fangs. A low, continuous growl rumbled from his chest, a sound that bypassed reason and went straight to the primal hindbrain that knew what a predator sounded like. The fury had him. He moved faster than thought, crossing the room in a blur. His hand closed around the boy's throat, lifting him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. The boy's feet kicked uselessly at empty air. "Theron, no," Brant's voice from the hallway. The old commander limped into the room, followed by the four, all with weapons drawn. "He is a child," Brant said, following orders. "You would have done the same at his age." Theron's grip tightened. The boy's face was turning purple, his eyes bulged. Death was seconds away. Maren moved. She stepped between Theron and Brant, directly into the line of sight of those black, inhuman eyes. She could feel the fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. It screamed at her through the bond, a howl of rage and violence and the need to kill. She dropped her knife. Both hands came up, slow, non-threatening, and then she placed them on his chest, directly over his heart. The effect was not instant this time. The fury was too strong, too far gone. Theron's free hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her throat, not squeezing, not yet. But the threat was clear. Behind her she heard weapons being drawn, the four preparing to do what they had done to Aldrin. But Maren did not pull away. She kept her hands on his chest, feeling the frantic hammering of his heart, the wolf raging beneath. And through the bond, she poured everything she had into him. Not words, not thoughts, just presence, just the steady, silent reminder that she was there, that he was not alone in the darkness. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the black began to recede from his eyes. The amber returned, flickering at first, then steady. The grip on her throat loosened, his hand falling away. He looked down at the boy still dangling from his other hand. Horror crossed his face. He dropped the boy, who collapsed to the floor, gasping and retching. Theron staggered back, his hands coming up to his face. When he looked at Maren again, his expression was raw. "I almost killed you." She touched her throat. There would be bruises. His fingers had left marks, but she was alive. The boy was still on the floor, crying. Brant moved to him, checking the bruises on his neck. "He will live," the old commander said. Theron's jaw was tight. "Kill him." "No." Everyone turned to stare at Maren. She had not spoken. She could not speak. But she had picked up the charcoal from her bedside table. On the wall she wrote in large letters, "Send him back. Message to Garrett. King offers parley. Come see the man, not the legend." Theron stared at the words. Torsten was the first to speak. "It is sound strategy, my king. Show him you have control. That the Omega steadies you, not weakens you. Invite him to witness it himself." Wulfric growled, "Mercy is weakness." Maren wrote again, her hand steady despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "Mercy is strength when you can afford it. Fear is what made Aldrin." Wulfric fell silent. The truth of it hit like a hammer blow. Theron looked at the boy, then at Maren, then at the words on the wall. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "Bind his wound. Give him a horse. Let him carry the message. Lord Garrett has 3 days to come to parley. If he refuses, we march to his gates and we do not ask again." Brant nodded. Roan and Cale lifted the boy between them, half carrying him from the room. When they were alone, just Theron and Maren and Wulfric standing guard at the door, Theron sank onto the edge of her bed. He looked exhausted, drained, ancient. "Twice now you have pulled me back. Twice you have stopped me from becoming him." He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw vulnerability in his face. Real, unguarded fear. What happens when you cannot hold anymore? When the anchoring burns you out and I am alone again with the fury? Maren touched the bruises on her throat. They hurt. But she had survived. And more than that, she had seen something in that moment of crisis. The fury was strong, but it was not invincible. It could be broken. It could be managed. She wrote on the wall again. "Then you have the four, Brant, the system. You are not alone." Theron read the words. A long moment passed. Then he stood and walked to the door. He paused there, his back to her. "Get some sleep, we ride at dawn." Wulfric followed him out, but the big warrior glanced back at Meryn. There was something new in his eyes. Not warmth, but the beginning of respect. When she was alone, Meryn touched the bruises again. They would fade, the cuts from the fight would heal. But something else had changed tonight. She had fought. She had survived. And she had saved not just the king, but a terrified boy who did not deserve to die for following orders. She looked at the silver dagger on her bedside table. One day she would use it. One day the fury would be too strong, and she would have to drive that blade home. But not today. Today she had won. She slept with the common blade under her pillow and woke to gray dawn light filtering through the window. Outside she could hear the sounds of an army preparing to move, the clang of armor, the stamp of horses, the low voices of warriors checking weapons and supplies. Bryn came with food and a thick riding cloak lined with fur. She saw the bruises on Meryn's throat and said nothing, just handed her a pot of salve. "For the marks," the old woman said. "They will fade faster." Meryn took it, grateful. "You fought well," Bryn continued. "Better than I expected for someone with only days of training. You have warrior's instinct." She left without another word, but Meryn felt a small bloom of pride. Praise from Bryn was rare and hard-earned. An hour later, she stood in the courtyard with 50 mounted warriors. The 4 sat their horses near the king, grim-faced and ready. Other guards she did not know, all wearing the black of Blackfrost, all silent and deadly. Theron rode up on his massive warhorse. He looked down at her, and for a moment something passed between them through the bond. Not words, just acknowledgement. She had proven herself last night. She was not just an anchor now. She was a survivor. He reached down. She took his hand and he pulled her up behind him. She would ride pillion, her arms around his waist, close enough to anchor if needed. The gates opened. The northern wind hit them like a fist, carrying the scent of snow and pine and the promise of violence to come. They rode out into the gray morning, an army of shadows heading toward war. And Meryn, the silent Omega who was learning to be something more, rode with them. Behind them, Black Frosthold stood like a sentinel of black stone. Ahead lay mountains and enemies and the terrible uncertainty of battle. But for the first time since the night Theron had claimed her in Ashenmoor's hall, Meryn felt something other than fear. She felt purpose. She felt the weight of the silver dagger against her hip and the strength in her hands that had fought off an assassin. She was the anchor. She was the leash. And when the time came, she would be the executioner. But until that day, she would fight. She would hold. She would be the silence in the storm. And maybe, just maybe, she would be enough. The journey to Garrett's territory took 5 days of hard riding through mountain passes and forests thick with snow. They traveled in tight formation, scouts ranging ahead, guards flanking the main column. This was not a royal procession. This was a military operation. At night they made cold camps, no fires to give away their position. Meryn slept wrapped in furs, always within arm's reach of Theron. The bond between them thrummed constantly now, charged with anticipation and the low growl of barely restrained fury. On the 3rd day, Torsten rode up alongside them. He had been ranging ahead with the scouts. "Lord Garrett's fortress is heavily defended, my king. 300 men, walls on a cliff face. Taking it by force would cost us half our strength." "Then we do not take it by force," Theron replied. "We take the supply lines, starve them, make them understand that rebellion has consequences." That night, the 4 gathered around Theron's tent for a war council. Meryn sat outside, close enough to anchor if needed, but not part of the discussion. Not yet. She listened to their voices, low and tactical. "Supply caravan runs twice a week from the southern valley," Torsten was saying. 20 wagons, 30 guards. We hit it hard and fast, cut their food stores. Wulfric rumbled his agreement. "Show them we can strike anywhere, make them afraid." "And if Garrett's men fight to the death?" Roan asked. "They are terrified of a mad king. They will not surrender easily." "Then we give them reason to fear something else," Theron said. "We give them discipline, control. We show them that I am not my father." There was a long pause. "Can you promise that?" Wulfric asked quietly. "Once the blood starts flowing?" Through the tent wall, Meryn felt Theron's spike of anger at the question. Felt the fury rise, responding to the challenge. But then she felt something else. Felt him reach for control, pulling the beast back. "No," he said finally. "I cannot promise that. Which is why she comes with us. If I fall, she pulls me back. And if she cannot, you end it. Same as always. Same as, The acceptance in his voice was terrible. He expected to fail, expected to fall to the fury on some battlefield and force his own men to kill him. Maren stood and walked into the tent. 4 pairs of eyes turned to her. She pulled out her charcoal and wrote on a piece of leather, "You will not fall. I will not let you." Wulfric snorted, easy words. She met his eyes and wrote again, "I fought an assassin. I anchored you twice at the edge. I am stronger than you think." Wulfric stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, his scarred face split into something that might have been a smile. "Perhaps you are, little Omega. Perhaps you are." The supply raid came on the 4th night. They waited in the trees along the road, 50 men holding position with the discipline of veterans. No one spoke. No one moved. They were shadows with steel. Maren could feel Theron's heart hammering through the bond, could feel the battle anticipation, the wolf straining at its leash. This was what he was built for: violence, conquest, the primal satisfaction of the hunt. The caravan appeared, torches bobbing in the darkness. 30 guards, just as Torsten had said. 20 wagons piled high with grain and supplies. Theron raised his hand, the signal. They hit like a hammer from the darkness. Steel clashed, men shouted, horses screamed, and through it all, Maren felt the fury surge. It was different in battle, sharper, hotter. The scent of blood triggered something ancient and terrible. Theron's wolf howled for release, for the joy of killing, for the red haze of bloodlust. She felt him losing control. She spurred her horse forward into the chaos of the fight. A guard turned toward her, raising a sword. Rowan's blade took him from the side before he could strike. The young warrior gave her a single nod and moved on. She reached Theron. He had dismounted, was fighting 3 men at once. His movements were too fast, too brutal. He was not disarming them, he was destroying them. His eyes flickered black. Maren threw herself from her horse. She stumbled, nearly fell, but kept moving. She pushed through the fighting, past the clash of steel, until she reached him. She grabbed his sword arm. The effect was like touching lightning. Pain shot through her, white-hot and blinding. She tasted copper, felt warmth on her lips. Blood. The anchoring was costing her. But the fury shattered. Theron's eyes cleared. He looked down at her, at the blood streaming from her nose, and something broke in his expression. "Fall back," he roared to his men. "Take the wagons and fall back." The Black Frost warriors obeyed instantly. In minutes the wagons were taken, the enemy guards dead or fled. And Theron was kneeling beside Maren where she had collapsed. "What did it cost you?" he demanded. She could not answer. The world was spinning. She felt hands lifting her, felt herself being placed on a horse, felt Theron mount behind her, holding her against his chest. "Ride," he commanded. They rode hard through the night, pursued by nothing but the knowledge of what she had just sacrificed. When they finally stopped at dawn, Maren could not stand. She collapsed, and her stomach emptied, bringing up blood. Wulfric was there, his face grim. "This is the cost. This is what anchoring in battle does. She will die if this continues," Cale said, his young face stricken. "Then we do not let her anchor in battle again," Rowan added. Theron said nothing. He simply carried her to a tent and laid her down. He sat beside her, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. "I am killing you," he said quietly. "Slowly burning you out, just like the text said." Maren's hand found her charcoal. With shaking fingers she wrote, "Worth it." He looked at the words for a long time. Outside she heard Wulfric's voice low and shaken. "I saw it. I saw what I saw nearly 30 years ago with Theron. A young man, barely more than a boy, lost to the fury. We had to beat him unconscious. He woke in chains, covered in the blood of men who had fought beside him, brothers he had killed without knowing." A pause. "But tonight," she stopped it. She pulled him back before it got that far. "If she had not been there, we would have lost him. We would have had to do to him what we did to Aldrin." "Gods help us," Torsten said. "She is dying to keep him alive." "Then we make sure her death means something," Wulfric said. "We win this war. We secure the North. We make certain that when she burns out, it is not for nothing." Inside the tent, Maren closed her eyes. The bond hummed, quieter now. Theron's presence a steady weight in her mind. She was dying. She had always known it. But tonight she had seen what it was for. She was not just holding back a monster. She was saving a kingdom, saving the men who served this king, saving the North from another generation of blood and madness. It was enough. It had to be enough. She slept and dreamed of silver daggers and the weight of crowns she would never wear. They camped within sight of Garrett's fortress, a jagged scar of stone clinging to a cliff face above a frozen river. The rebel lord's banners snapped in the wind, the sigil of a snarling ice bear a direct insult to the king's authority. Maren had recovered enough to sit upright, though her hands still trembled and the taste of copper lingered in her mouth. The anchoring during the supply raid had cost her more than blood. She felt hollowed out, as if something essential had been burned away. And beneath that hollow feeling, something new, a subtle change in her body that she had not yet told anyone. She knew what it meant, the nausea, the tenderness, the way certain smells made her stomach turn. She was carrying his child. The knowledge was both terror and wonder. The texts had been clear. A pregnant anchor burned twice as fast. What might have been a year of life was now measured in months, perhaps only weeks if the anchoring continued at this pace. Brant came to her tent on the second morning. The old commander moved carefully, one hand pressed to his chest, where the wound that was slowly killing him throbbed with each labored breath. "You anchored in battle?" he said without preamble. "Foolish." Maren reached for her charcoal. He would have killed his own men. Brant nodded slowly. "Yes, he would have. I have seen it before." He sat heavily on a camp stool, his weathered face drawn. "When Theron was 22, we fought raiders from the eastern wastes. He was young, eager to prove himself. The fury took him in the thick of it. By the time we subdued him, he had killed 4 of our own warriors, brothers who had trained beside him since childhood." The old man's eyes were distant, seeing ghosts. He woke in chains. The look on his face when he understood what he had done. That is the look that has haunted me for nearly 30 years. The knowledge that he carries his father's curse, and one day it will claim him as it claimed Aldrin. Brant looked at her directly. "You gave him hope. You are dying to buy him time, to buy us all time. But there is something you need to know," Maren wrote. "What?" "Your body is changing. I have seen enough pregnancies to recognize the signs. You carry the king's heir." Maren's hand froze. "And the child will inherit the curse," Brant continued quietly. "The fury will pass to him as it passed from Aldrin to Theron, which means you are not just dying for a king. You are dying for a son you will never see grow up." He leaned forward. "I have a year left at most, perhaps less. And in that year, I will teach that boy everything I know. So when you are gone and I am gone, there will still be someone who remembers what it means to hold the fury at bay." Maren wrote slowly. "How long do I have?" Brant's expression was grim. "Months. The pregnancy will accelerate the damage. Every anchoring will cost you more. If you continue at this pace, you may not live to see the child born." She stared at the words she had written. How long do I have? Such a simple question, such a terrible answer. Brant stood, his movements pained. "I tell you this not to frighten you, but to prepare you. The North will need more than just your sacrifice. It will need the system you help us build, the knowledge that one anchor is not enough, that we all must learn to be his leash." He left her with those words and the weight of a future she would not see. That afternoon, a rider approached under a white flag. Lord Garrett himself, flanked by 10 guards, coming to the parley Theron had offered. The two forces met on neutral ground, a flat stretch of frozen earth between the armies. Garrett was a hard-faced man of 44, the same age as Theron, with eyes that had seen too much loss. "King Theron," he said, his voice carrying across the cold air, "you summoned me to parley. Your messenger arrived, alive and unmolested. That is why I came." Maren felt a small satisfaction. The terrified boy had made it home, one life saved. Theron sat his warhorse, utterly still. Maren was mounted behind him, close enough to anchor if needed. The 4 flanked them, hands on weapons. "You call me tyrant," Theron said. "You say I am my father's son. That madness rides me, and the North deserves better." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Your father killed my family, my wife, my 3 daughters. He butchered them like animals while I was away on campaign. When I returned, I found them in pieces. He called it justice for imagined treason." The fury stirred in Theron. Maren felt it through the bond, a spike of defensive rage. But beneath it, something else. Guilt, shame, the weight of his father's sins. Theron dismounted. The movement sent a ripple of tension through both armies, but he walked forward, alone, until he stood within sword reach of Garrett. "I know what he did," Theron said, his voice low. "I was 16 years old. I stood in that hall and watched him slaughter 42 people, including my mother. She tried to stop him, tried to reach the man she loved. He gutted her in front of me." Garrett's expression flickered. And when Commander Brant finally struck the killing blow, when my father fell with silver in his heart, do you know what I did? Silence. I picked up the crown from his corpse and put it on my own head. Because someone had to rule. Someone had to stop the bleeding, and every day since I have fought not to become him. Theron's hand moved to his chest, to the scars hidden beneath his armor. I carry the same curse, the same fury. It claws at me every hour of every day, demanding blood and violence and the release of mindless rage. And I fight it. With everything I have, I fight it. He gestured back toward Maren. This woman is my anchor, the only thing standing between my crown and my father's madness. She is dying to hold me human, burning out month by month so that I do not become the monster you fear. Garrett looked at Maren, saw the pallor of her skin, the trembling hands, the cost written on her face. She carries your child, Garrett said. It was not a question. Yes, and the pregnancy will kill her faster. Perhaps she will live to see him born, perhaps not. But either way, she chose this. Chose to die so that I could remain human long enough to build something better. Theron's voice was hard, certain. How long does she have? Garrett asked. Weeks. Perhaps a handful of months if we are fortunate. And then I will have the four. I will have Brant. I will have a system of men sworn to restrain me or end me. I have learned from my father's mistakes. I will not die alone with my demons. He held out his hand. Oath for oath. You keep your lands. Send grain tithe as agreed. Your son serves as page, not hostage, and learns to rule justly. And when the fury takes me, when she burns out and I have nothing left, you will lead the army that ends me. Garrett stared at the offered hand. You would trust me with that? You lost everything to a mad king. If anyone has the right to strike me down, it is you. Slowly, Garrett reached out and clasped Theron's hand. Oath sworn, he said, for the North and for the daughters I will never see again. They returned to their respective camps. The terms agreed. No blood spilled, no lives wasted. A victory won through honesty and shared burden. That night, as they rode back toward Blackfrost Hold, Maren felt something new through the bond. Not fury, not the constant pressure of the beast, but a kind of quiet pride. Theron had faced his father's victim and found understanding instead of hate. The journey home took 4 days. On the second night, Theron finally spoke of what Brant had told him. He knows about the child. Maren nodded in the darkness. And he told you what it means, how it will accelerate your death. Another nod. Theron's arms tightened around her where they rode. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, I am killing you, slowly burning you out. And now I have put a child in you that will speed your death even more. Maren pulled out her charcoal and wrote on a scrap of leather, tilting it to catch the moonlight. My choice, worth it. He took the leather, read the words, and tucked it carefully into his tunic over his heart. They spoke no more that night, but Maren felt something shift through the bond, a deepening, an acknowledgement that their time was measured now, not in years, but in the passage of the moon across the sky. They returned to Blackfrost Hold as winter descended in earnest. Snow piled against the black granite walls, and the wind howled through the mountain passes. Word of Garrett's submission had spread. The northern lords gathered to witness the king's triumph and to see the mysterious Omega who had tamed the Blackfrost fury. They filled the great hall, hard men with harder eyes, all calculating how this shift in power affected their own positions. Maren stood behind Theron's chair, her pregnancy not yet visible, but the cost of anchoring written plainly on her face. She was pale as snow, her hands trembled constantly, and blood stained the handkerchiefs she kept hidden in her sleeves. Old Lord Aemon of the Silvermane clan approached the throne. He was ancient, his hair white as winter, his eyes clouded with age but still sharp. Your Majesty, he said, his voice like dry leaves, the North has watched you for nearly 30 years, waiting for the day the fury would consume you as it consumed your father. Silence fell over the hall. But something has changed. You brokered peace with Garrett without bloodshed. You show control where Aldrin showed only madness. And this, we understand, is because of her. He gestured to Maren. The texts speak of anchors, soul bonds that can temper the fury. We thought them legend. But she is real, and she is dying to keep you sane. Aemon turned to address the assembled lords. I propose we acknowledge what she is. Not a southern cast-off, not a cursed Omega, but the queen who saves us all. A murmur ran through the crowd, not all agreement. Some lords looked skeptical. A woman stepped forward. Lady Helena of the Ironwood clan, a stern-faced widow with 2 grown sons. "She is not of northern blood," Helena said coldly. "She cannot speak. She carries a child but may not survive the birthing. What kind of queen is that?" Before anyone could respond, Brant's voice cut through the hall. The old commander stepped forward, moving slowly, his hand pressed to his chest. He looked like death walking, his face gray, his breathing labored. The kind who bleeds for her people. He turned to face the assembled lords. "I have served the Black Frost line for 40 years. I have seen 3 kings. Aldrin was strong until he was mad. His father was weak and died young. Theron is the first who fights the curse instead of surrendering to it." His eyes swept the hall. "And he fights because of her. I have watched her anchor him 9 times in 4 weeks. Each time it costs her. Each time she bleeds. Each time she chooses to burn a little brighter so that he can remain human." Brant's voice grew stronger, drawing on reserves of will. "I have perhaps 3 months left. This wound in my chest will take me before spring. In that time, I will train the prince she carries. I will pass on everything I know, and when I am gone, there will still be knowledge, still be hope." He turned to Theron. "My king, I ask one thing. Crown her now. Let her wear the iron while she still lives. Let her son know that his mother was a queen, not just an anchor." Theron stood. For a moment, he simply looked at the old warrior who had served his family for 4 decades. "You honor us, Commander. It will be done." Brant nodded once, then slowly, painfully he knelt. "To the queen who gives us hope, to the anchor who holds the North together, I pledge my last breath to her service." The hall held its breath. Then Wulfric stepped forward. The massive warrior knelt beside Brant. "I pledge my sword." Torsten joined them, my mind. Ron, my strength. Kale, my faith. One by one, the 4 knelt. And then, like a wave spreading across the hall, the northern lords began to kneel. Not all, but enough to matter. Lord Aemon raised his hands. His attendant brought forward an iron-bound chest. Inside, resting on faded black velvet, was a crown. It was not gold or jeweled. It was iron, forged to look like 2 wolves with their bodies entwined, their heads meeting at the center. Ancient, powerful, the crown of the first northern queens. "This has not been worn in 500 years, Aemon said. "Not since the last queen who was said to be a true soul bond to her king." He lifted the crown carefully. Theron looked down at Meryn. He was not commanding. He was asking. She thought of Ashenmore, where she had been nothing. She thought of the life she carried, a son who would need a legacy of strength. She thought of the men kneeling before her, warriors who had seen her bleed and had chosen to follow anyway. She nodded. Theron took the crown from Aemon. The iron was heavy in his scarred hands. The hall fell silent, every eye fixed on the dais. The Wolf King of the North knelt before his dying Omega. "You came to me broken and cursed. I claimed you for necessity, not love. I bound you to a death sentence and called it purpose." He lifted the crown. "But you have given me more than I ever asked for. You have given me control, peace, hope, and you carry my son, knowing it will kill you faster." He placed the crown on her head. The iron was cold and heavy against her brow. "For the time we have left, you are my queen, my anchor, my equal. And when you are gone, your name will be remembered as the woman who taught monsters to be men." The bond between them flared white, a brilliant light that filled the hall. The 2 wolves on the crown seemed to shimmer, iron becoming something more for just a moment. The hall erupted in the thunderous stamping of feet and the clash of weapons against shields. The warrior's salute. She was queen now, an Omega who could not speak, carrying a cursed child, dying one anchoring at a time. But she was queen nonetheless. 3 weeks passed. Meryn's pregnancy advanced rapidly, her belly swelling as if to outpace her failing health. The anchoring continued, though less frequently. Theron tried to shield her, to handle the small furies himself, but there were times when only her touch could break the storm. Each time cost her more. Blood came not just from her nose now, but from her ears. Her vision blurred. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the charcoal to write. And through it all, Brant trained. Not the child who was not yet born, but the 4. He taught them the techniques he had learned over 40 years, how to recognize the signs of the fury rising, how to position themselves to restrain without killing, how to be anchors of flesh and steel instead of mystical bonds. On the 4th day after the coronation, Brant collapsed. They carried him to his chambers, and he did not rise again. Maren came to see him, moving slowly, one hand supporting her swollen belly. The old commander was gray as ash, each breath a struggle. But when he saw her, he smiled. "My queen," he whispered, "come sit." She lowered herself carefully into the chair beside his bed. "I failed your father," Brant said, looking at Theron, who stood in the doorway. "Do not let me fail you." "You have never failed me," Theron said, his voice rough. Brant's eyes found Maren. He reached out with a trembling hand and placed it on her belly. Beneath his palm, the child kicked. "Tell my grandson," he breathed. "Tell him his grandfather died believing the curse could be broken, that monsters can choose to be men." Maren took his hand and nodded, tears streaming down her face. Brant's smile widened, just slightly. Then his eyes closed and his breathing stopped. The greatest warrior Black Frost had ever known died in his bed, peacefully, having passed his knowledge to those who would carry it forward. They did not burn him on a pyre. It was winter, and the old commander had requested simplicity. They buried him in the frozen earth beside the keep's memorial stones, a warrior laid to rest among warriors. The loss of Brant tore at Theron. Maren felt it through the bond, a grief so profound it threatened to crack his control. That night the fury came harder than it had in weeks. Theron paced their chambers like a caged beast. Maren was too weak to stand, her body exhausted from the pregnancy and the constant drain of anchoring. But she reached for him anyway. He came to her, collapsing beside the bed. She placed her hands on his head, anchoring him through sheer force of will. The cost was immediate and catastrophic. She felt something tear deep inside her, a ripping sensation that drove the breath from her lungs. Warmth spread between her legs. Not blood, water. The child was coming. Too early, too fast. Theron's eyes cleared instantly. He saw the fluid, saw her face go white with pain, and his grief transformed into action. "Get the healers!" he roared. "Now!" The next hours were a blur of agony. The child was not due for another month, but the anchoring had triggered early labor. Maren's body, already pushed beyond its limits, struggled to bring forth life even as it was dying. She screamed, silent screams that tore from her throat without sound. The healers worked frantically, but they all knew the truth. This birth would kill her. The only question was whether the child would survive. Through the pain, she felt Theron's hand gripping hers, felt his presence through the bond, steady and solid, even as her own life slipped away. "Push," the head healer commanded. "Push now!" Maren pushed. Her vision went white. Her heart stuttered. And then, distantly, she heard it. A cry, sharp and strong, the sound of a child taking his first breath. "A son," the healer said, golden-eyed and fierce. Theron took the tiny, squalling infant, wrapped in furs, and brought him close to Maren. She could barely see through the darkness creeping in at the edges of her vision, but she could make out golden eyes. Her son. "Eric," Theron said, his voice breaking. "We will call him Eric. It means eternal ruler." Maren's hand, trembling, reached out to touch the baby's cheek. So soft, so perfect, worth everything. Her hand fell back. Theron passed the child to a waiting nurse and took Maren's hand in both of his. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for the time you gave me, for our son, for proving that the curse does not have to win." She was too weak to write, but her eyes said everything. No regrets, no fear, just peace. Her other hand moved slowly to the silver dagger on the bedside table. She touched it, then touched his chest over his heart. The message was clear. If the fury comes, use it. Do not hesitate. Theron's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "I swear it." Her breathing was slowing now. The bond between them was fading, the light dimming. The four entered silently, standing vigil. Wulfric knelt beside the bed. "You were stronger than any of us, little queen." "Torsten, you showed us what honor looks like." "Roan, we will protect your son." "Cale, we will remember." Maren's eyes moved over each of them, then back to Theron. She mouthed words her voice could never say. "Worth it." And then the light in her eyes faded. The bond went silent. The anchor who had held the North together for barely 5 months was gone. Theron did not cry. Northern kings did not cry, but he held her hand long after it went cold, and something inside him that had been learning to be human died with her. They burned her at sunset the next day, northern tradition for queens. The entire kingdom stood witness in the bitter cold. Even Lord Garrett came, riding 3 days to pay respects to the woman who had made peace possible. Her iron crown was placed on the memorial stone beside Brant's. Beneath it, they carved words. Maren Ashwood, the North Star Queen. She died so monsters could choose to be men. 5 years passed like the turning of seasons. each one marked by snow and struggle and the slow building of something new. Eric was 7 years old, a serious child with his father's golden eyes and his mother's quiet strength. He did not speak often, choosing silence as a tribute to the mother he had never known. He had learned hand signs from the seven, another connection to her memory. Theron was 49 now, gray threading through his dark hair, new lines carved into his face by years of ruling without his anchor. He looked older than his years, but he had not fallen. The four had become the seven, joined by 3 warriors who had sworn the same oath Brant had taught them. When the fury came, they surrounded Theron, their combined presence a reminder of why he fought. It was not as effective as Marin's touch had been, but it was enough. Most days. On this particular morning, Theron stood on the battlements with his son. They watched the northern lights dance across the sky, ribbons of green and silver against the black. "Tell me about Mother," Eric signed. Theron knelt beside his son, as he had done countless times before. "She was the bravest person I have ever known. She came to me broken and cursed, just as I was. And instead of running, she chose to stand. She chose to bleed. She chose to die slowly so that you could be born, and I could remain sane enough to rule." Eric touched the small iron crown he wore, a child-sized version made in tribute to his mother's. "Do I have the curse?" he signed. "Yes," Theron answered honestly. "You carry the fury. I have seen it when you are angry, in the way your eyes flash gold. But you also carry her gift, the ability to choose control over chaos. Will I need an anchor?" Theron was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps. Or perhaps you will learn what took me too long to understand, that anchors come in many forms. The 7 are my anchors now, different than your mother, but still present, still keeping me human." He stood, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Your mother proved the curse can be managed. She gave us the time to build a system. That is the legacy she left you. Not just her silence, but her sacrifice. The knowledge that one person burning bright can light the way for generations." Far below, in the courtyard, the 7 were training young warriors. Wulfric's gray hair caught the morning light as he corrected a recruit's stance. Torsten reviewed tactical maps with junior officers. Rowan laughed at something Cale said, the sound carrying on the wind. They were older now, all of them, but they remained, loyal, steadfast, living anchors for a king who had lost his truest one. "Tell me the story," Eric signed, "about the hall." Theron smiled slightly. It was his son's favorite. "Your mother stood in the shadows, watching another man pledge himself to someone else. She thought herself cursed, worthless. But the fates knew better. They sent me to claim her, not for love, but for necessity." He looked out over his kingdom, snow-covered and peaceful. "They call her the North Star Queen. Do you know why?" Eric shook his head. "Because she was the fixed point in my sky, the one who guided me home when the darkness threatened to consume me. And even though she is gone, her light still guides us." He touched his chest, where the bond had once hummed, where he still kept the scrap of leather with her final written words tucked against his heart. "She taught me that monsters can choose to be men, that curses can be managed, that dying for something you believe in is the most human thing we can do." Eric looked up at his father with solemn eyes. "Will you tell her story to my children?" "Yes," Theron promised. "Every generation will know what she sacrificed, what she was." They stood together on the battlements as the northern lights danced overhead, a father and son bound by the legacy of a queen who had lived for 5 months and changed a kingdom forever. Below them, the 7 went about their duties, living anchors keeping the curse at bay. In the great hall, her iron crown rested on the memorial stone, catching candlelight beside Brant's marker. And in the cold northern earth, Marin Ashwood slept, her sacrifice complete, her purpose fulfilled. She had been the cursed Omega, the dying anchor, the silent queen. But in her death, she had given the North something no conqueror ever could. Proof that monsters could choose to be men. Proof that sacrifice mattered. Proof that even the shortest life, lived with purpose, could echo through generations. She had been theirs for only 5 months, but the North would remember her forever. End of the Anchor's War.